I'll introduce the next speaker. Shuddhabrata Sengupta is an artist and writer, member of Rax Media Collective and co-initiator of Sarai, a platform for discursive partnerships between theorists, researchers, practitioners, and artists engaged in reflecting on contemporary urban spaces and cultures in South Asia at the Center for Study of Developing Societies in Delhi. Shuddha's talk today is called Practicing Art, Imagining Politics.
Good morning, and thank you very much to the Basis Actual Kunst and the former West Research Congress for inviting me to be here with you. It's always lovely to be returning to Istanbul and in this great city. And I've really enjoyed the past day and this morning. I was thinking about Mies van der Rohe when you were speaking. The last project that we did involved some forensic explorations around the body and the body of work of Rosa Luxemburg. And one of the traces, of course, was Mies van der Rohe's monument, which actually doesn't exist anymore, but as a facsimile, or as a reduced facsimile. And some of those concerns will return in this talk. I'm going to share with you some of the thinking that my colleagues and I in the Rax Media Collective have been doing, and this presentation will include some notes as well as some references to recent work. Coming from where I do, Delhi, it's important to know that before colonialism altered the map of the world, for us, particularly in the city of Delhi, the West, or Maghreb, was really Rum, Kustantunia, Anatolia, this very longitude. So to be in a former West Congress in our own former West is a very resonant situation. And I hope to make the best of it to produce an alteration of our own map, our sense of the frontiers of our practice, our limits, our horizon. Our own ufak, as many of you say in Turkish, and also in one of the languages that I speak, Urdu. The word for horizon is ufak. Urdu is itself a word for the speech of encampments, taken again from the Turkish, because once upon a time the city I live in, Delhi, was a Turkish-speaking city about 800 years ago, and which is a trace of the bonds that exist between our cities, our tongues, and the arcs of our horizons. I'm showing you the picture of a lighthouse inside a cinema. Pictures, 4 pictures. One of our works titled Unusually Adrift from the Shoreline. Visitors to the old municipal cinema of Sandnes, a small town in coastal Norway, stumble upon the uncanny sight of a great lighthouse, unusually adrift from its shoreline. This lighthouse was in Sandnes, but let us imagine that it is one of the several that illuminates these shores. Yeşilköy, Ayherkapi, Rumeli Feneri, Fenerbahce, or Kizkulesi. And I've looked at lighthouses in Istanbul, and they're absolutely fabulous. For every lighthouse is a node in a network of light and signals that stretches from one horizon, from the arc of one horizon to another. The abandoned cinema, with its wave-like stepped floor, has become an echo of the sea, and the lighthouse has apparently erupted there as if from the depths to scan the aquamarine darkness with a solitary roving beam. The cries of whales ring out in Sandnes' solid streets, so accompanying this lighthouse was a sound recording of songs of whales that went out into the city. As if the buried world of water had reclaimed the city, and the great submarine creatures were summoning people to revisit its submerged places. Unusually Adrift from the Shoreline is a work about darkness, light, horizons, navigation, and memory. Centered on a cinema lost to time, it is intended to prompt unfamiliar thoughts in a city, thoughts and feelings about the pleasures and hidden perils of losing oneself in the movies, at sea, and in the oceanic expanse of time. To live free and single as a tree, as Nazim Hikmet, a poet that I grew up reading when I was a child, for what else is a lighthouse but a flaming tree on the coastline? And that's the bulb that inflames the tree. And in fraternity, like a forest. So to live free and single like a tree, and in fraternity like a forest, this longing is ours. I'm sure it sounds much more beautiful in Turkish. A cinema is a space where a beam of light transforms the cares of each day into dreams that set sail into the night. If the inner life of the people of a town, their desires, their dreams, their reasons for laughter and sorrow are a flotilla of sailing boats, their floating boats of fraternity, then the cinema is their lighthouse, their free and singular tree. The electricity and incandescence it produces lights up the nervous system of all its inhabitants. It helps some dreams to float away towards the horizon and others to come ashore. For a moment, let us consider the lighthouse to be a metaphor for the things we do as artists. Our practice at its best is a beacon that signifies the distances we need to cross on a daily level, from the coastlines to the horizons of our experience. The horizon does not represent a limit or a boundary, as we saw yesterday. It determines indeterminacy, but a way station, for as soon as we reach the latitude where we had marked the horizon, another lighthouse points the way to the arc of another horizon. And so we can say that the practice of the arts are beacons that light their way through the expanding horizons of the possibilities of politics and ethics. Lenin, in a very rare moment of lucidity, once said, aesthetics is the ethics of the future, which presumes that the aesthetics are the ethics of the future, which means that ethics are the aesthetics of the present. I mean, I don't know which way it works, but anyway. A lighthouse, a dream of a tree transformed by light and fire reaching towards the horizon. Remembering Osman's dream, the originary myth of the Ottoman expansion. This time, not as the germ of imperial conquest, but as a resonant image for what it might mean to consider the plenitude of the earth in all directions. And I quote from a kind of translation of this Osman's dream. I don't know if this is something that children have to read in school textbooks when they're young here. A goodly tree sprang forth, which grew in beauty and strength ever greater and greater. Still did the embracing verdure, the inflamed tree, remember, of its boughs and branches cast an ampler and ampler shade until they canopied the extreme horizon of the three parts of the world. Under the tree stood 4 mountains, which he knew to be the Caucasus, Atlas, Taurus, and Haemus. I suppose Haemus is the Himalayas. These mountains were the 4 columns that seemed to support the dome of the foliage of the sacred tree with which the earth was now centered. From the roots of the tree gushed forth 4 rivers, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Danube, and the Nile. Tall ships and barks innumerable were on the water. The fields were heavy with harvest. The mountainsides were clothed with forests. Thence, in exulting and fertilizing abundance, sprang fountains and rivulets that gurgled through thickets of the cypress and the rose. In the valleys glittered stately cities with domes and cupolas, with pyramids and obelisks, with minarets and towers. The crescent shone on their summits. From their galleries sounded the muezzin's call to prayer. That sound was mingled with the sweet voices of thousands of nightingales and with the prattling of countless parrots of every hue. Every kind of singing bird was there. The winged multitude warbled and flitted around the fresh living roof of the interlacing branches of the all-overarching tree, and every leaf of that tree was in shape like unto a scimitar. Suddenly there arose a mighty wind and turned the points of the sword leaves towards the various cities of the world, but especially towards Constantinople. That city, placed as the junction of 2 seas and 2 continents, seemed like a diamond set between 2 sapphires and 2 emeralds to form the most precious stone in the realm of the universe. The Ottoman Empire is a vanished dream, and we hope that all empires will fade one day. But their demise is not something we need to mourn, for in passing away and in the consequent awakening of new forms of claiming the world, not for domination but for sharing, has given each of us the possibility of becoming lords of the horizon, which is the traditional title of the Ottoman sultans. So we can all be lords of the horizons. When we cease to think with the habits of the sultans of our times, the divisions between east, west, north, and south may yet cease to matter. Our meeting here is in anticipation of that possibility, in the way that art anticipates the most exciting possibilities of the future. And so we, Raqs Media Collective, from the former East, meet you from the former West, from our former West, at the very place which once used to be our former West. The map that I'm beginning to draw of our practice for you suggests a restlessness. And I think that this restlessness might be a good place to start thinking about what it means for us to be practicing art, imagining politics. Raqs is a word in Arabic, Turkish, Persian, and our own Urdu that denotes a whirling, a dancing, a practice, and a cultivation of ecstatic contemplation founded on kinesis. So our name, our artistic signature, comes from the whirling, the raqs, of whirling dervishes, of darwish, which I'm sure you're familiar with in Istanbul. So that's the whirling dervish figure right in the center. In the Raqs Media Collective, Jibesh Bagchi, Monica Nerula, and I have invoked the idea of kinetic contemplation of the world as an imperative that drives our practice. The notion of a peripatetic aesthetic that I'm trying to explore here is indebted to that conversation and is closely allied to the Lebenspraxis of an agile, kinetic, materialist practice of contemplation that we try and follow as Raqs. To my mind, peripatesis, which comes from the Greek word peripatetikos and the allied Sanskrit root parivrajakta, stands for the practice, which means the same thing, of being constantly on one's feet, signifies first of all a radical dissatisfaction with stability. As a form of philosophizing or a way of life and practice, following from the Aristotelian peripatetics and leading to all manners of pilgrims and Plato's gymnosophists, the Indian philosophers, were also peripatetics who called themselves parivrajaks, and whirling dervishes. So, I mean, we know in medieval Islamic cultures the importance of the practice of rihla, the constant journeying. And there are these incredible travel narratives throughout the Middle East of people who were traveling not only because they were curious, but because it was a way to contemplate the world. And those narratives constitute a lot of what we know of the history and geography of those times. Now, this privileges a kinetic rather than a still form of contemplation of the world because it understands that the world itself is not a still place. Nothing is still, nothing is permanent. Nothing prompts us to look for answers to our predicaments only within ourselves. In fact, the only route inwards into ourselves passes through the territory of others. We have to go outside ourselves, we have to be beside ourselves. We have no evidence either from the physical world or from history to suggest that stillness can be held out as a useful description of any natural or historic process. Everywhere and at all times we are confronted with different rhythms, scales, and velocities of kinesis. This means that the anxiety to arrive at permanent answers and the desire for solutions that have a bearing on all time and space runs against the grain of how history and nature operates. And not only do we have horizons, when we are whirling, the horizons multiply and whirl around us. Let me quote here from a fragment in a short text called Parivrajak's Diary, the Peripatetic's Diary, a collection of short pieces mainly to do with travel by a pioneering anthropologist, sort of lapsed and occasional Gandhian and a peripatetic philosopher from 1930s, 40s India, Nirmal Kumar Bose. Very, very hardly known. But he writes in a text simply titled Shomudro, in my native language, Bengali, the sea, about his desire for freedom from the entanglements of petty politics and the nationalist movement. But what he writes about the sea and the horizon is, I think, particularly resonant in any city by the sea. I quote, "Today, sitting on the shore, I think, why are human beings so blind? Why does their vision stray from the goal? Is there no liberation from the dross of politics? My eyes remain on the distant horizon. Close to where I sit, restless waves rise and fall on the shore. Further away, their countless crests break the calm surface of the ocean. The gulls that dip in and out of the water in search of food play hide and seek with the sea. Such turbulence, not a particle in the ocean stays still. Everything, as far as the eye can see, is alive with movement. Not a single drop of water can ever achieve a moment's repose. Looking at them, I suddenly realize that despite the tumult in the water, they all are resolved themselves in the serenity of the distant horizon. They, the waves, are no match to the horizon. They are defeated by its depth, its serenity, its tranquil strength." A little further, he returns again to the beach, the same beach on a stormy night. Now the sea is anything but tranquil, but he stays transfixed by the turbulent waves. He writes, "Just as I was transfixed earlier by the ocean's serenity, today I am arrested by the turbulent horizon. But now, thinking again, I realize that it is not the sea that is tranquil or turbulent. The sea is inert. It feels nothing, neither tranquility nor excitement. What value can the sea have for itself? It has no memory, it feels no pain. But I am a human. A single current of feeling in my consciousness can transform the sea, make it alive. Nature is a stage within me, and the theater of nature is scripted by my emotions. In its darkest depths, nature is formless, devoid of feeling. It is my heart that colors it with feeling. Is there anything else that can be said?" Going to sit by the sea can change a lot of things. It can transform the way we think about our fellow human beings, about politics. Coming as I do from a landlocked city, I'm incredibly jealous of the fact that you are here by, the Straits of the Bosphorus with your opportunities to look at Asia one day and Europe another, or in the same day, and that you can actually transform your visions of the world on an hourly basis. It can make us look at our own feelings in a new light, and finally it can make us realize that in the end, the engine of feeling, the substance of the, if you like, uncomfortable word, spiritual tumult that can take hold of us when we suddenly get a glimpse of the plenitude of the horizon is of our own making. Travel takes us far away from ourselves and then brings us right back to a place closer to ourselves, closer to ourselves than the jugular vein than we ever thought we would get. In the end, this is what the thirst or hunger for movement is about. Attachment to the land brings with it many comforts, but it never allows us to encounter ourselves as we would let ourselves encounter another. A journey makes you a stranger to yourself, and that is why probably bowls, a certain kind of, practicing musicians, poets, folk poets in Bengal, where my ancestors come from, talk of reaching a destination that they call Ochinpur, or the unknown city, which can be reached only after much wandering, but which strangely enough is located within your own material body. A journey makes you your own friend, your own traveling companion. You look at an abandoned rail track and countless conversations with yourself become possible. You become your own adversary, your own accomplice, your own companion. You get to Ochinpur. Do you like looking at maps?
You like looking at maps? I find new places to think about. Are you planning journeys? No. But I like to think about how things and people move. Do you like old maps better or new ones? I like maps, not how old and new they are. What do you like about them? I like to see a picture and think, where a ship changes course, where a road crosses the hump of a mountain, where a country abruptly comes to an end. You can do it for hours at a stretch. And I like to think about how a place moves in and out of a map. I like the way the colors change. They use 4 colors to make a map of the world. Just 4 colors can take care of everything. But the map doesn't say all there is. There are lots of things that a map doesn't say. There are some names that are not on the map. You can look hard for them, but you won't find them. Not even with a magnifying glass. Perhaps it's a question of scale. That is the explanation. I keep making mental maps, with all the missing places in and all the rest out, just to see what it would look like. You mean you take a place that is missing between here and there? Or it's halfway between the bend and that river that is marked on the map and this line of the border, and you ink that in and get rid of the rest? I don't draw it. I just think what it would be like if it were there. It takes hours to fill in all the missing places. And then you can change the way the 4 colors are arranged. And you have a world you wouldn't recognize.
That was an extract from The Measure of an Acoustic Reason. So you are always encountering, as you whirl, and as the horizons change around you, worlds that you don't necessarily recognize when you come upon them. We like looking at maps. We are cartographers on our feet. We are artists. We are nomads. Nomadism is not a one-off singular movement from one location to another. It requires regularities and returns. That is the difference between the nomad and the migrant. The nomad walks the same path between places. The migrant leaves one place for another. The betweenness of the first movement and the finality of the second departure enclose between them a world of difference. In fact, this difference may be what we are struggling to define as the distinction between translocality and the consequences of the hegemonic form of globalization in late capitalism. A brief digression into a work called Escapement, inspired by the horological or clock-making concept of the catch and release mechanism that governs the movement of mechanical clocks and watches. The installation, currently showing at the Sao Paulo Biennale, features 27 clocks arranged across a grid corresponding to the longitudes or time zones. Each clock bears words for emotions and states of being in place of the hours, such as when it is fatigue past exhaustion in Baghdad, it might be epiphany past ecstasy or anxiety in Delhi. There is an hour for ecstasy, and I was reminded of when Peter Osborne was talking about the ecstatic as a measure of in terms of time and subjectivity, and Heidegger's notion of ecstasis in the way in which we construct our shape of time. 3 clocks out of the 27 run counterclockwise, denoting mirror time, an escapement from this world to the imaginary longitudes of Babel, Shangri-La, place I always wanted to be, and Macondo, the city conjured by Gabriel Garcia Marquez in 100 Years of Solitude. The paths that nomads walk on need to be maintained across and over time and generations. While settlements have witnessed ebbs and flows, cities have been depopulated and repopulated, and so have trade routes. The entire history of Central Asia and the languages that many of us speak, from Turkey to Bangladesh, bear witness to the obstinate persistence of nomadism across generations and the kind of words that we share across our languages. Hence, sarais, hence the settlements that grew with sarais as their nuclei. hence towns like Sarajevo. Hence the history of institutional practices such as Sarai, the interdisciplinary network and platform for research and practice that we, Rux Media Collective, co-founded in Delhi. Nomadism and location have in this instance at least a symbiotic relationship. And the decline of many cities and seemingly permanent settlements in our geographies have also to do with the inability of nomads to traverse well-worn paths because of the borders that inhabit movement. And I think Nicolas Sarkozy calls a curse upon Paris when he decides to expel the Romas, because cities like Paris are actually created through long histories of movement and nomadism and peripatesis. The tragic destiny of a city like Kabul from the early 20th century, right through the Taliban years and the war in Afghanistan, is, for instance, signatory of the fact of what happens to location when borders close in and nomads carrying ideas and images and songs and things from other places are no longer welcome. In such times, it becomes the responsibility of all bearers of artistic practice to keep the paths trod by nomads through history alive. And that is why we stress the importance of hospitality, of an ethic and aesthetic of hospitality, of the importance of the construction of permanent refuges for transients as an essential factor in a very new and a very old cultural matrix and ethic. To delve into roots in such spaces is necessarily to discover an intricate matrix of intersecting chaotic wills to globality. Osman's dream was as much a dream about the world and of and to the world as any other dream. It's only the accident of the last 400 years or 300 years that allow us to imagine that the conceptions of the world come only from the former West, not from this, my former West. That is true, we think, of all our genealogies. Our selfhood, the apex of the myriad identities that constitute our coming into history today, is composed as much of the many silences and acts of forgetting as it is of remembering and assertion. These omissions are especially those that are located at the point where the tendrils of our roots touch the tendrils of the roots of others we may wish to deny inheritances from. In the Islamic world, the forgetting that there were once two Qiblas, one to Mecca and another to Jerusalem. And that there is a forgetting of the fact that one had to look across the limitations of one's own practice to another to actually situate oneself. The deeper we go into our genealogies, our cultures, our practices, and our languages, the more horizontally spread they become. In this sense, the discovery of one's roots is also the discovery of each of our nomadic inheritances. The more I think about the history of my city, the more I have to think about the history actually of your city, Istanbul. Each of these nomadic inheritances is an instance of a will to globality. The will to globality, it's a phrase that Okwi Enwezor once described in talking about his curatorial mandate for Documenta 11, need not be seen only in terms of the desire of the local to reach a predetermined global space, to be in on what is provisionally constructed as the global space. We argue that it also resides in all our specific, located abilities to imagine ourselves as global subjects, as creating global spaces, no matter where we are, because every place in the world is the center of its own arc of the horizon. What happens when we look head-on at the world? By way of answering this question, I'd like to play for you a fragment from one of our recent works, The Capital of Accumulation, in which you encounter an imaginary conversation between a woman called Lakshmi Sorabgur, which is a kind of anagram for the name Rosa Luxemburg, a character designed to make possible an engagement with Rosa Luxemburg and her body. Incidentally, there's this kind of forensic digression into the return of her body in a Berlin hospital that has a minor role to play in this work, but more importantly with the body of her work, with the accumulation of capital. And so this is a conversation between her and an apocryphal, itinerant, peripatetic, anarcho-syndicalist revolutionary from early 20th century India, who was a member of the International Workers of the World in America, was a refugee and a prisoner of war in Europe. A man called Amir Haidar Khan Inqilabi, whose improbable but real wanderings, or rihla, may have taken him to the fringes of the circle around Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht in Berlin. And I'll just... Excuse me, well... Can we have some sound, please?
How many times must I sit at the Café Universal in anticipation of your arrival, Lakshmi? With bulletins and chess pieces practicing melancholic moves against invisible adversaries and friends while I wait?
And there's always a game spread open for your pleasure.
Like in Zimmerwald. I sat in the Café Voltaire. Rosa was in prison. I was her anonymous messenger.
Remember Zimmerwald?
I can never forget our ornithologists' congresses. One time, Rosa asked me to do bird calls. She knew of my gift. She wanted to play a game to see if the birds of a Middle European forest could respond to the voices of their Indian comrades. So I sang the arcing lament of a great Indian sarus crane. Rosa reminded everyone present, as only she would, that its proper name was Grus Antigone Antigone. She asked if anyone could discern in the voice of the sarus crane an echo of the first defiance of the citadel, the law of the state. She said, "We should never let them claim the memory of our defeats as the chronicle of their victories. Like Antigone," she said, "we should watch over our dead. We should insist on our own account of their passing."
You pretended to be ornithologists to fox the secret police of 14 countries, but the Dadaists in the table next to you thought you lot were Freemasons, and you thought that they were snake oil salesmen.
I played chess. I beat Illich, you know.
Enough reminiscence, Grandmaster Haidar Inqilabi. Let's get down to business.
Make your move.
I have decided to stop letting myself be turned into stone.
That's easier said than done, you know.
Some would say it's easier done than said. And enough's been said already.
Someone needs to write what is to be undone.
I am in my time, and you are in yours. Between us, we have a century on this table. We have looked too long to find the face of capital. We thought we could turn a mirror to Medusa's head, but the mirror became a mask. And we found her image infecting our vision. Like birds with mirrors, we have fought with our own reflection. We fought images with images, and we are like exhausted birds who have succumbed to the hardness of the surface that they were railing against.
So how do you stop being imprisoned by this mirror? How do we stop analysis from turning into fatalism and then fatally wounding us?
You can allow yourself to be surprised by what the world might become.
You know, as a lion tamer at the Berlin Zoo, and later when I handled tigers for the Indian films at Woltersdorf, I was always surprised to see how the animals always translated baits into morsels, and then morsels into baits, like philosophers, forever interpreting the world.
When you think capital, you isolate one image, and you think you have overcome capital by turning that image inside out or upside down, and you think that you have gone beyond that image. But what you forget is that capital is not an image, not an object, not a state form, but a social relation exceeding the power of representation.
Dice games never end.
And revolution never wins. It just is.
You still make your moves. You look for openings.
You keep looking for openings. You make, you flee, you turn, you be, you nest, you grow. You find ways to create the life you are no longer prepared to defer to an unknown future.
It is not desirable for the future to be captive to the present, just as it is unthinkable that the present be held hostage by the future.
Neither the arrow nor the boomerang of time. You decide your capacities. You decide when to change them, accelerate them.
You become its protagonist. You're not alone, Lakshmi. Everything has a shadow. A past, a future, something invisible as yet uncounted, still waiting to be figured. We wax, we wane, we add years to our lives, we come to the end of our days. But we are many. Our name is Legion.
And sometimes we are possessed of more things than even we can know.
Why would it be otherwise? The fear of being turned into stone is only a momentary arrest in the world's coursing through you.
The fear of being turned into stone is only a momentary arrest in the world's coursing through you. The horizon of the question, what is to be done, points the way to the question, what is to be undone. A part of an oblique dialogue with spectres of Marx, Chernyshevsky, Lenin, and Luxemburg, and in anticipation of the communist horizon, which evocatively names our next session, that we in the Rux Media Collective have been doing for some time. In conclusion, I'd like to offer you two more instances of our practice. First, what is to be undone, fragments from a communist latento. A latento is this, our 21st century response to the Communist Manifesto. Latentos, taken from latent, is a word we made up to stand for the opposite of the manifesto. We like to think of it as our contribution to the fashioning of the batin, the hidden key to the zahir, the manifest of the Communist Manifesto. The spectre of abundance haunts the empire of scarcity like a shadow. Who can own or ration breath, laughter, thought, desire, or madness? Don't save your breath for another day. It is not desirable that the future be captive to the present, just as it is unthinkable that the present be held hostage by the future. Neither the arrow nor the boomerang of time. Is the end of history history? A million ways to make things rough is better than one way to make things smooth, from each according to their generosity to each according to their pleasure. And you can leave your calculators behind. The diversity in and of the commons challenges the singularity of property. There is only one way to possess something, but there can be countless ways to share it, and then some more. We will wait for the time when the socially necessary labor time to make something can be debated socially. Until then, restlessness will remain the best antidote to exhaustion, and insomnia the best cure for nostalgia. The collective transformation of the world requires the continuous networking of an infinite array of otherwise impossible choices. Make only trouble here. Take care as you make the transition from bondage to freedom, because even the social relations worth fighting for are fragile. Do not use ammunition or open a magazine that has crossed its expiry date. To end, one last fragment from the Capital of Accumulation.
For a change, a Polyneices keeps vigil over an Antigone's body outside the gates of Thebes. Is it time to settle accounts, to look for what was lost and what was found in the last 90 years?
On the credit side, there's a sort of habeas corpus. We finally have a body, even if it is only a body. We know who she is, but we cannot take her name. On the debit side, we lost the plot. What can you do with a body if you can't take her name? What use is an addition in the statistics of disappearance? Who will tend an unmarked grave? Something is still missing. A sense of closure, a drawing of lines, a marking of limits. Limits.
In the equation between what the world is and what we want it to be, why is it that the question of limits generally weighs in on the side of the questioned, rarely, if ever, on the side of the obeyed? As if to hear, what exists, exists. The reality of capital is also its eternity. We're also at the same time to be told, be realistic what you ask for. There are limits to how much can be altered. How many more times will this be heard? Why are there no limits to what we are told cannot be altered? Or is it just that we are avoiding asking this question?
A missing body is like an absent question.
What is it that is not being said?
These are the rumors that trouble the street, the doubts that keep you awake, the whispers that unseat.
It is being said, and it is being denied.
Rosa never left the building.
The capital of accumulation has not yet resolved the question of what it must do to bury the casualties of the accumulation of capital. It does not matter that these consequences are still denied a name. It all depends on what you choose to hear.
Can a factory die in one place and be born in another? Strange things happen when factories die. Their specters keep escaping the confines of their makeshift morgues.
Inside, I am on the side of outside. If you twist and fold a ribbon of space, what was inside a moment ago could end up as the outside. When a surface cracks, the crack is the surface. The outside is as much within something as without. You have other plans. You have a getaway car. You're in a roll, aren't you? Your rear-view mirror is so badly askew that you see far ahead whenever you look behind you. There's no escaping the future when you pursue the past. Now try saying that in your head, the other way around. Horizon. Horizon. 2,000 fragments of possibility, foraging quietly for the future. Across the mudflats there will be a special economic zone, a new megacity that takes 6 months, not 60 nor 600 to build. A 6-lane highway will span the distance to a 6-month city. The drawings are done. Maybe 2,000 flamingos have other ideas. They just turn up to embarrass you with their obstinate attachment to this forsaken world. They refuse to move. They mess things up. They say, "Deal with me. I was, I am, I will be." And then what do you do? What can you do? The earth moves sluggishly, and life takes its time to grow, to move, to fly, to mate, to nest, to feed, even to die. Capital needs a swifter wobble about the planetary axis, shorter seasons, brief lunch breaks, a snappier interval between one working day and another. Something more pliable than that slow, variable capital, that wet mass called humans. The city has gone so far, grown so fast, that the edge has come to the center. The flamingos are now inside the city. The map is out of date. How discontinuous, how surprising, how interrupted, how asynchronous, how mysterious, how quixotic things have been. And there's no accounting for contingencies either. For the perversity of protagonists distributed all across the mudflats of time, nourishing themselves on signs of life drowned in the water. Flamingos getting russet by the hour as they feed. Someday, they'll be as red as Rosa. Rosa Luxemburg writes to Sonja Liebknecht from Wrocław prison, mid-November 1917. I was recently reading a scientific work upon the migrations of birds, a phenomenon which has hitherto seemed rather enigmatic. From this I learned that certain species which at ordinary times live at enmity one with another because some are birds of prey whilst others are victims, will keep the peace during their great southward flight across the sea. Among the birds that come to winter in Egypt come in such numbers that the sky is darkened by their flight, are, besides hawks, eagles, falcons, and owls, thousands of little songbirds, such as larks, golden-crested wrens, and nightingales, mingling fearlessly with the great birds of prey. A truce of God seems to have been declared for the journey. All are striving towards the common goal, to drop, half dead from fatigue, in the land of the Nile, and subsequently to assort themselves by species and localities. Nay more, during the long flight, the larger birds have been seen to carry smaller birds on their backs. Cranes have passed in great numbers with the twittering freight of small birds of passage. Comrade Crow, choose your flamingo. Choose your time. Fly.
For each of us, choosing our moment of flight, determining that instance at which to throw ourselves into history, is a decision that defines the horizons of our practice, of our life. Like the crow that needs to seek the flamingo to fly on, we all need to define our own flights of practice to reach other horizons. Thank you.